Okay, fantastic. So, as Renato said, my name is Corinne McKay. I've been a freelancer since 2002, and I live in Boulder,
Mhm.
Colorado. Can we mute everybody, Renato? There are some people who have their microphones open. I live in Boulder, Colorado, which is in the,
Hay que
sorry, there we go. Okay, I think we're muted. I live in Boulder, Colorado, which is in the Rocky Mountains in the western United States. And as Renato said, from about 2003 until the mid 20 teens, I was exclusively a French to English translator. I'm certified by the American Translators Association. And then in the mid 20 teens, I caught the interpreting bug and I studied for more than a year for the court interpreter certification exam in Colorado, the US state where I live, passed that in 2019. And then during the school year, at the height of COVID, I did a master's degree in French conference interpreting from Glendon College in Toronto, Canada. And I now do about 65% interpreting and 35% translation. And I was on the board of the American Translators Association for about 7 years, and I was the president of the American Translators Association from 2017 to 2019. And I say that not in any way to sort of brag about myself, but to say that in that role on the ATA board, I talked to lots and lots of people in both what I would call the language professions, so what all of us do, translating and interpreting, and what I would call the language industry, which is sort of the bigger picture of the companies that buy our services. So that's a little bit about me. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, first of all, the big changes that the language professions have undergone since 2019, what the situation looks like now, where are we headed, and for you, probably most importantly, what advice would I give to beginning translators and interpreters? So here's a little bit about what I do. As I said, I've been a full time freelancer for a long time, 22 years. I'm certified for both translation and interpreting. And for those who are interpreters, just a few statistics that in 2023, I interpreted about 193 days, 103 days in court, and about 90 conference assignments. And most of my translation work is for direct clients, and most of my interpreting work is for agencies. So I think I see kind of both sides of that equation. So, just to spoil the surprise, am I here to tell you like all of us are going to be replaced by computers? Let's give it up. No, um, I got my first university degree in 1993, so now 31 years ago. And at the time, when I told one of my French professors that I wanted to be a translator, she said, I wouldn't do it if I were you because computers are taking all of that over. Well, that was 31 years ago, and we're still here. I think also, the one thing that I tell people a lot is I have a 22-year-old daughter who is soon going to be in the position of choosing a career for herself. And to be honest, if she wanted to become a translator or interpreter, I would feel very positive about that. I would encourage her to pursue it. In fact, she has a friend who grew up bilingual in Japanese, who I say all the time, like, when you have to figure out how to make money with your language skills, come talk to me. And I'll tell you about it. And I think it is true that the language professions, particularly translation, have changed a lot since I started out and particularly since 2019. So let's talk about that. So, first, we had COVID. in which, people had been talking for years, if not decades, about where are we going with remote interpreting. Remote interpreting was sort of the wave of the future until all of a sudden, when COVID hit, we had this very rapid transition to remote interpreting. And I think at that time, a lot of us thought, I certainly did, that remote interpreting might be sort of a temporary thing, right? Sort of last only during the pandemic, and then everything would go back online, which at least in North America has proven not to be true. Remote interpreting is really here to stay. Then, just as we were emerging from that, we had exactly 2 years ago now, in November of 2022, here came the beta version of ChatGPT. And again, I think this sort of slow acceleration that we had seen toward machine translation plus post editing, at least on the translation agency side of the market, accelerated very rapidly and became almost the norm, I think we could say. Now, here's the really hard thing. Huge change is always polarizing. And what I mean about polarizing is when you look at huge changes, some people think it's great and some people think it's horrible. And often there is not a whole lot in between. Here's an example with remote interpreting. I have talked to numerous interpreters who say, I hate remote interpreting. Bad audio is a constant problem. We're not there in the room. We can't ask questions. I really dislike it. Then I think I would personally say, whatever I think about remote interpreting, it really is the only reason that I have a job. Even when I did my conference interpreting masters, I actually told my husband, I don't really know what I'm going to do with this degree because at that time there was very little French conference interpreting work where I live, and I'm not interested in moving. So for me, it gives me access to a completely different range of clients than I would be able to work with locally. On the translation side, I think here's the really disruptive change that we have seen. In my opinion, many, many translators who cruised along for years to decades working for agencies that have now made this rapid shift to machine translation plus post editing are either going to see their income greatly decrease or they're going to find other ways to make money, which may or may not have to do with translation or languages. The other, what I mean again by polarizing, is that on the flip side, most of the translators I know who were well established in the direct client market before AI fever hit are actually doing fine. I mean, I would say that with my translation direct clients. They don't really care how I do the translation as long as the translation is done well, and machine translation does not write well enough for what those clients pay me to do. So I think we're seeing a lot of what I would call polarization. Now, here's how this shows up for me. And I'm saying this just as an example of the crazy things that AI and machine translation are doing in the language industry right now. 2023, as I said, I've been a freelancer since 2002, and 2023 was the most money I have ever earned as a freelancer. So not only is my business not dying, that it's the most money I've ever earned as a freelancer. And it was the year in which I lost both a translation and an interpreting client to AI or machine translation. How did that happen? Well, the translation client was, I think how a lot of us lose translation clients to machine translation. This for me was a big, big client. I had worked with them for 6 years, translating about 80,000 words a year. And in 1 year, they went to edited machine translation. Then they switched to unedited machine translation and just said, we have to make the most of our budget. They did not really comment on how they compared the quality to my human done translations, but for them, it was a financial issue. The interpreting client was a little different, which I think is going to continue to be the case because machine interpreting is really not there yet for live interpreting. There might be other use cases for machine interpreting, but not for live stuff. But this was a client where I did English voice tracks to educational videos that they made in French, and they decided to go with automatically generated captions. So, where does this leave all of us? What I would say to all of you is the future of translation and interpreting belongs to people with diversified businesses, people who do more than one thing, and most importantly, to work people who work for clients who care. Because the clients who don't care, who just think we want the cheapest solution that is fast and that is like okay-ish in quality, they're just going to use those automated solutions, right? We probably have clients already who are just running the stuff through DeepL, maybe having someone read it, maybe not, and calling it done. And what I mean by diversified businesses is doing more than one thing for more than one type of client. So I think that we all saw that at the start of COVID, that people who did more than one thing did better than the people who only did one thing. Because what do you do if all of a sudden that one thing takes a nosedive? So here's what I would look for. Most importantly, you want to be looking for clients where when they think of the list of things that matter to them, price is going to be no higher than third or fourth on their list of factors that they choose a translator or interpreter. So if I had to guess, I would say that my clients would say, here's what we care about: quality, reliability, confidentiality, and a personal relationship with me, right? They want to be able to send me one email and say, translate this, right? And at some point, they care about price, right? They don't have an unlimited budget, but it's not like clients who are saying, we picked this person because they're cheap. I also think we want to look for clients who have a lot at stake. They have a lot to lose if the translation or interpretation goes poorly, so they're not going to pick the cheapest person because they want it done well. And then some of you may know Michael Schubert. He is a German to English translator who's American and recently relocated from the US to France. And the way he put it, which I thought was great, was clients with more money than time, right? Clients who just want to throw money at a problem and get it solved. Now, let's talk about how the sort of new wave, the new reality is affecting translation versus interpreting. I think it is just a fact that translation is a lot easier to automate than interpreting because writing text is a lot easier for a computer to deal with than speech. I also think it is a lot harder for someone who isn't really like a word person to identify a poor quality translation, right? Any of us who are professional translators probably can read about 3 sentences of a translation before we know that it's a machine translation, right? Because the writing style is very robotic. But I think it's just the truth that a lot of the world doesn't particularly care about that, right? People have developed a much higher tolerance for bad writing, mistakes, missing words, typos, things like that. Now, on the other side of the coin here, interpreting just is a lot harder to automate. Like a lot of times when people who don't know anything about interpreting ask me, "Are you afraid of being replaced by a computer?" I say, when you try to dictate a text into your phone, how often is that as accurate as you would like it to be? And then think about it translating that into another language and reproducing it as speech. And then I think we also have these other like soft factors, you might call them, with automated interpreting. It's very annoying to listen to. So think about like when you go on an airplane and you have to listen to the recorded safety messages, right? After a few sentences, you're not even paying attention because, again, it's so robotic. And would you really want to sit there and listen to an entire online course, an all day meeting, 2 days of meetings in automated interpreting? But I would also argue that there is a greater financial incentive to automate interpreting because interpreting is generally more expensive than translation and it's more logistically intensive, right? The interpreters have to be there live, either in person or on Zoom. You can't just, punch up an interpreter on demand when you want one. I am not anti AI. I think that AI has a lot of issues, but I am not here to tell you like AI is evil. Let's never use it for anything. And personally, I think that it really is not helpful to say about AI, it's useless and evil, never use it for anything, because I don't think that's true. I actually use AI quite a bit, but not for actual translation. For example, ChatGPT wrote the title for this presentation. I asked it to give me some ideas for presentation titles, and I ended up using one of the titles that it came up with. And I use AI, I use ChatGPT quite a bit for interpreting research. For example, last week I had to interpret a speech about the erosion of trust in public institutions in a specific country. And the slides that the speaker had sent us were very, very basic, right? I could tell that the speaker was really not going to use the slides very much. And so I went on ChatGPT and said, I'm an interpreter and I have to interpret a speech about the erosion of trust in public institutions in this specific country. What are some recent news items that might be related to this topic? And ChatGPT, again, actually gave me some really great examples of current events in this country, and the speaker did end up mentioning some of them. So here's what I think. Number one, when I started out as a freelancer in 2002, there really was, particularly for translators, what you might call a career path where people started with big agencies. So people would start out working for like TransPerfect, Lionbridge, these huge agencies that were always hiring. Then they would move on to smaller, what you might call boutique agencies. And I think that that now is a lot harder because those huge agencies pay so little that it is really tough to make a living off what they are paying. So I think really right from the start, you have to be more creative about finding work. So when I talk these days to beginner translators, not so much interpreters, because I think that interpreting is sort of holding up better than translation is. But when I talk to beginning translators who are doing well, and I ask in general, like, who do you work for? What kinds of clients do you work for? That they will typically say, well, I have some agencies, but then there's this museum near where I live, and I thought that they should have their signs in other languages. So I contacted them and I work for them now. I mean, it's people who are getting more creative about finding work. I still love translating. My direct client translation work is holding up quite well. And I think it is just true for all the reasons I've mentioned that interpreting is more future proof than translation. When you think of like, what I always call it is like the magic headset, right? How long is it going to take until we can say to someone who goes to, a doctor's appointment, here, put on this headset and you're going to be able to listen to the doctor in Japanese? I think that day will come, like, in the world in general, but I don't think that that day will come in the working lifetime of those of us who are working today. And I think the main thing I would say to all of you is, believe me, there is still well-paying and interesting work out there for the people who go look for it, but people don't, right? We mostly sit at our desk and work on what falls into our inbox while complaining, translation and interpreting are dying. I need to find another job. And the reality is that most of us are not even going and looking for that interesting, well paying work. So don't be that person who just sits there. Take a proactive role in your own business or your own career. So that is about what I've got on the slides. Can we mute the person who's unmuted, Renato? Um, Here's where you can find me. I'm at Corinne@translateright.com. You can email me a question. I know we have some time for questions now. My website is trainingfortranslators.com, and I'm also on Instagram, and I have a Training for Translators podcast as well. And any of you, if we're not connected on LinkedIn, send me a LinkedIn connection request. Okay, that's about what I've got. So I think we have a few minutes for your questions.
Muchas gracias, Turín, por esta presentación, por contarnos desde tu experiencia cómo has enfrentado los desafíos que presenta la inteligencia artificial hoy en día. Les invito a todos y a todas las participantes a poder hacer preguntas en el chat. Las vamos a leer en voz alta para que Corín las pueda contestar. Yo, Corinne, te quería preguntar sobre eh, un par de estrategias para salir a buscar clientes directos. ¿Qué le recomendarías a los traductores que están recién comenzando de cómo poder encontrar a esos clientes directos que más valor pueden ver en nuestro trabajo?
Mhm. And again, to the interpreters, you're doing a great job. Thank you. Um, so number one, you have to have a specialization, right? When you apply to agencies, you can sort of send in their general application and see what they send you. So number one, for direct clients, you have to have a specialization because otherwise you don't know who to market to, right? Direct clients is really going to be you going and finding them. And so you really, really have to start from your specialization. And then I think a really good place to look is professional associations for your specialization. So look for associations for immigration lawyers. Look for associations for multilingual content companies, things like that, because I think they often have membership directories that can give you ideas of potential direct clients because you really don't want to be looking for those clients one at a time, right? You want to find, where if I want to do a marketing campaign to immigration lawyers in Buenos Aires, surely there's an association for those people, right? Then I think the two ways that are the easiest to contact potential direct clients is email or LinkedIn. So personally, my favorite way, I'm not sure, I'll put this in the chat. If any of you have never done direct client marketing, and you don't know Ed Gandia, I just put his name in the chat. He's American. Fun fact, his first language is Spanish. Ed Gandia's first language is Spanish. He is sort of the guru of email marketing, which is where you are sending highly personalized emails. So you know how we all get these marketing emails like, "Dear sir or madam," Would you like to buy my services? And the kind of email marketing you want to be doing is the opposite of that, right? So when I do email marketing, I would be emailing someone who, let's say, I do a lot of international development translation. So I would be doing something like emailing someone who works in West Africa programs with a non-governmental organization, an NGO. So, as you guys know, a lot of countries in West Africa are French speaking, and I would email that person and say, hello, I am a French to English translator specializing in the international development sector. In looking over your website, I noticed that you're starting a polio vaccination program in Senegal, and I wonder if there might be a need for a French to English translator to help translate the documents related to that. Would you be the correct person to speak with about offering those services? And if you don't know Ed Gandia, he actually wrote a book called Warm Email Marketing. Put the title in the chat here. Warm Email Marketing. I believe you can only buy it on Amazon because it's a Kindle ebook. It's like $3 US, not much at all, $10 US, but not much at all. So I think that that starting out with that type of email marketing or connecting with potential clients on LinkedIn and doing pretty much the same thing. The hard part is that now, unless you have LinkedIn Premium, you're limited to 5 personalized LinkedIn invitations a month, and you can only write 200 characters with those requests. So it used to be maybe not unlimited, but you got a lot more than 5, and you could write 300 characters. So obviously, they're trying to push you toward paying for LinkedIn Premium, which might be worth it, right? I mean, even if you found one good direct client, it might be worth it to pay for LinkedIn Premium. But I think those are the ways to start: specialization, email, LinkedIn. And also, if you find through those professional associations some events that you might like to go to. So, does that professional association have webinars? Do they have a conference? Do they have other events you could go to and try to connect with those clients in person?
Excelente. Muchas gracias, Corinne, por esas recomendaciones. Un par de preguntas que están en el chat que enviaron por privado. Eh, ¿Qué herramientas de inteligencia
Great.
artificial recomiendas para traductores e intérpretes? ¿O cuáles usas tú?
Oh, so I'm not the expert. Where I get all of my information is I belong to a platform called Tech Forward. A lot of you probably know it already. The people who run it are Josh Goldsmith and Nora Diaz. And Renato, have you had Nora Diaz speak? She's Mexican.
Yes. No, no la hemos tenido nunca.
You should. Because yeah, Nora Diaz, she's like a translation technology genius, and she's Mexican. So she would present for you in Spanish. And she's a really nice person too. So, um, oh yeah, lots of compliments for Nora in the chat. Yeah, you should ask her. So, where I get all of my technology information is I belong to Tech Forward. They have free and paying memberships, and Josh and Nora run it, and they just had an AI, I'll put it in the chat again, AI in Translation Summit. And to be honest, like, I don't really find translation technology interesting as like a subject. I really just care what it can do for me. And so I just get my information from them because honestly, the only tools I really use are DeepL. So, yeah, Carla commented they have a similar thing for interpreters. So all of you probably know DeepL, but I put it in the chat. Like if I'm interpreting for something and they send us the speeches, 5 minutes before, the only hope of keeping up is to have at least a start in the other language, right? If you're starting from nothing and you haven't even read the speech, you're never going to keep up. So I would typically use DeepL to get a pre-translation of something if the client sends it really late or, not far enough in advance to prepare. And then I just use ChatGPT I think one thing that I have tried to get better at is thinking of like use cases for ChatGPT. And again, at Josh and Nora's AI in Translation Summit, I watched a few of their presentations. And for example, that's where I got the idea to have ChatGPT improve your presentation titles. And because I think one thing that has gotten a lot different about ChatGPT, which is also a little creepy, is that it does better if you talk to it like you're talking to a person, right? So if you log on to ChatGPT and say, hello, I like the example I gave you when I said, hello, I'm an interpreter, and I'm going to have to interpret a presentation about the loss of trust in government institutions in this specific country. Can you think of any news items that the presenter might talk about? So really, like, I'm not that creative. I'm mostly DeepL and ChatGPT, but join Tech Forward. At least get the free. I think the paying membership is worth it, and it's not an affiliate deal. They're not paying me to say that. I think the paying membership is worth it, but at least get the free membership to Josh and Nora's platform. And Renato, you should definitely have Nora present for you because she could present in Spanish.
Yeah, we will talk to her. Absolutely.
Oh, and Carla asked in the chat, good question. Do I use the paid version of ChatGPT because of confidentiality? No, because I don't put confidential stuff into it because I don't use it for actual translation. I have the paid version of DeepL for that reason. And even then, I would never put anything really confidential even into the paid version of DeepL, or I would remove all the identifying information because I think that's still a concern. But I use the free version of ChatGPT because I really just ask it questions, right? But I have oh, Alicia wants to see the slide before this one, sure. Oh, hold on. There we go. Is that the slide you want, Alicia? Great. So yeah, I have the paid version of DeepL and I have the free version of ChatGPT, but because I really just ask ChatGPT questions. And another thing that I find, this was in a presentation in Josh and Nora's summit. Another thing I think ChatGPT is really useful is the sort of like search engine on steroids questions. Like there was a presenter, Italian translator, Riccardo Schiaffino, who gave an example of asking it, how are the rights of children considered in divorce cases in Italy compared to the US? So I think things like that, you could go look that up. You could go research it yourself, but I think ChatGPT does a way better job of finding that, but always ask it for the sources, right? Because some GPT engines give you the sources by default, and ChatGPT does not. So you always want to ask that. Ask it? Where did you find that information? Or can you tell me your sources for that?
Genial, genial, muchas gracias. Alguien puso en el chat, Corín, si es que eh, como nuevos profesionales saliendo al mercado a buscar clientes directos, ¿cuáles serían los 3 principales argumentos para elegir a un traductor humano versus a alguien que esté tratando o pensando en ocupar traducción automática?
Mm, yeah, good question. So I think that most importantly, like I'm just going to repeat something that I said already. You don't want to be working for clients where number one on their list is price, right? I mean, maybe machine translation is helpful to you, right? But you want to make that decision, not be using it because the client wants the fastest, cheapest translation that they can get. So I just think that for me, the big thing is looking for clients where quality, confidentiality, consistency, things like that are their main decision-making factors. And to me, like if this sounds kind of, I don't know, mean, but if a client starts out by asking, how come I'm better than machine translation? I probably don't want to work with them anyway. Like, and I'm not saying I don't think machine translation is inherently bad. It's just not the kind of work that I want to do. Mariana asked in the chat, any tips for interpreters and need to get clients. So Mariana, I'm not super familiar with the market in Latin America because I don't do Spanish. But in North America, at least, agencies still pay well for conference interpreting. Like if you have a conference interpreting degree, or like I think in the North American market, it's pretty important to have a conference interpreting master's if that's the route you want to go. But for example, my clients in Canada will typically offer 700 Canadian dollars for a assignment of up to 4 hours. That's 500 US dollars at the current exchange rate, which to me is like, I'm happy with that because typically we're making that for like 1 to 3 hours of interpreting, plus the prep time, but usually that's coming out to at least 100 US dollars an hour. So I think, that would be my comment there, is that in the markets I work in, agencies still pay quite well for interpreting. And so I have some interpreting direct clients, but not a ton because I still get good work in the agency market, which for me is now rarely true in the translation market. I like working for agencies, right? I mean, they find the clients, they deal with the end client, they pay you. I really like that, but I have found that it's really difficult to find agencies that will pay my rates for translation.
Super, super. Thank you very much, Corinne. Muchas gracias, Corinne, por esta presentación. Muy interesante conocer tu perspectiva y tu experiencia con respecto a este tema que es tan interesante. Hay un hype de la inteligencia artificial, de Machine Translation ahora. Eh, así que muy contento de haberte tenido, muy honrados de haber también podido contar con tu presencia el día de hoy. Y nada más que agradecer que haya estado aquí y también a todas las personas que se pudieron conectar un día lunes a las 3 de la tarde acá de Chile para poder escuchar esta presentación. Quiero agradecer a las intérpretes, Josly y Carolina, por su trabajo el día de hoy. Un aplauso para ellas. Todos son estudiantes de último año de EATRI, una escuela de idiomas acá en Chile. Así que les agradecemos por su labor y por su profesionalismo durante esta sesión. Muchas gracias nuevamente. Gracias, Corín. Gracias a todos por haberse conectado y nos vemos en una próxima charla de este ciclo de charlas Ágora. Cuídense mucho, que estén muy bien. Gracias, Corín.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, huge thanks to the interpreters. Interpreting live question and answer is really difficult and really stressful, and you did great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cuídense mucho todos.